Bismillah, Assalamu alaikum. In today's video, I'll be giving yet another example of the blind faith of atheists, namely embryology proves evolution. Now, embryology is seen as one of the biggest proofs for evolution, so this video is really important. Let's get started. Here's the atheist claim. The fact that embryos of various animals of different types, such as fish, mammals, reptiles, amphibians, uh, birds, etc., are so similar in their earliest stages show they descend from a common ancestor. Darwin thought, not only this, for example, they will claim for a mammal, first the embryo looks like a fish, then a reptile, I think then an amphibian, etc., then it ends up looking like a mammal. So, this shows that basically there is a common descent from a common ancestor, and this shows evolution is true, supposedly. Darwin thought this was the single strongest piece of evidence for Darwinian evolution. At the time, this was based on the work done on embryos by Ernst Haeckel, or this was widely supported by that. This is seen as one of the strongest proofs for evolution. Okay, so just so no one accuses me of straw manning the atheist, right? What I've done is I've basically put sections from the book Why Evolution is True by Jerry Coyne, the section on embryology, so that if anyone wants to read all of this, they are more than welcome to. And you can't claim that I'm straw manning them because this is their argument. Now I will read some of it because I think this is important, and just so you can get a feel for their argument. Let's start with that fishy fetus of all vertebrates, limbless and sporting a fish-like tail. Perhaps the most striking fish-like feature is a series of 5 to 7 pouches separated by grooves that lie on each side of the embryo near its future head. These pouches are called brachial arches, but we will call them arches for short. Each arch contains tissue that is developed into nerves, blood vessels, muscles, bone, or cartilage. As fish and shark embryos develop, the first arch becomes the jaw and the rest become gill structures. The clefts between the pouches open up to become gill slits. Basically, this is him describing the process of development of embryos of basically I think dolphins and fish and sharks. Now, according to him, this is supposedly normal. Now let's go into the other vertebrates because he's using this as an evidence for his claim. But in other vertebrates that don't have gills as adults, these arches turn into very different structures that make up the head. In mammals, for example, they form the three tiny bones of the middle ear, the Ischlachian tube, the carotid artery, the tonsils, the larynx, and the cranial nerve. Sometimes embryonic gill slits fail to close in human embryos, producing a baby with a cyst on the neck. This condition, an atavistic remnant of our fishy ancestors, can be corrected with surgery. How does he know these are fishy ancestors other than subjective value judgments? Let's move on with the argument. Our blood vessels go through especially strange contortions. Keep this in mind. All of this supposed to be strange, right, or weird. Based on what criteria? I mean, is any of this anything other than a subjective value judgment? Isn't is all of this based on the claim how God should have created and shouldn't have created? What is he basing this claim on, other than subjective value judgment and intuitions? Keep this in mind. In fish and sharks, the embryonic pattern of vessels develop without much change in the adult system, but as other vertebrates develop, the vessels move around and some of them disappear. Mammals like ourselves are left with only three main vessels from the original six. The really curious thing is that as our development proceeds, the changes resemble an evolutionary sequence. Basically, he's saying that first the embryo is fish-like, then it's basically like amphibians, then it resembles reptiles, then basically it becomes similar to mammals. This part is actually a lie, and I'll show why it is a lie. Now this is the crux of his argument, right? This is the main time he's making the argument, and the answer of all of this is basically evolution, or that God wouldn't have designed these things. I'll read this because this is really important. These patterns raise a lot of questions. First, why do different vertebrates, which wind up looking different, very different from each other, all begin development looking like a fish embryo? Why not? I mean, think about this. God could have all of them looking like fish embryo at the start, or a reptile embryo, or amphibian embryo, or a mammal embryo, or maybe another species type of embryo. Or God could have chosen to give each of them individual, like a human is a human embryo, like a human embryo, a mammal is like a mammal embryo, a fish is like a fish embryo. What is any of this other than subjective value judgments? Why do mammals from their heads and faces form from the very same embryonic structures that become gills of fish? Why not? Seriously, why not? Why do vertebrate embryos go to such a contorted sequence of changes in the circulatory system? Contorted based on what criteria, other than subjective value judgments, of course? Why don't human embryos or lizard embryos begin development with the adult circulatory system already in place rather than making a lot of changes in what developed earlier? Why? Why not make a lot of changes? Why does our sequence development mimic the order of our ancestors fish to amphibian to reptile and to mammal? Of course, he's assuming here they are our ancestors, and it doesn't resemble the sequence of our ancestors. This part is a lie, actually, and the evidence for that is actually quite massive. But more than that, let's say this was true, right? Let's say this was true. How would that prove evolution? Why can't God choose to do things in that particular way? Is any of this anything other than subjective value judgments? Basically, he goes through the rest of his claim is he's just saying that this is because of evolution. This is best explained supposedly by evolution. So here's the refutation. Firstly, similarity equaling common descent is an assumption. Whether it comes to embryology, anatomy, or genetics, there is no evidence other than assuming similarity equals common descent. Again, this is what he's doing. If the embryos are similar, then they must have a common ancestor, right? This is an assumption, it's not an argument. Moreover, it's a false assumption. Thirdly, which of the points he made here was not subjective? I mean, no one in their right mind will claim these are objective points. That was all just subjective whining. The atheist assumes here, according to the theist position, God has intuitions, and those intuitions are similar to human intuitions. So basically, they are assuming that God would have designed things, or humans would have designed things. What is the evidence for this assumption? Which theist holds this assumption? I mean, Muslims don't. I don't think Muslims hold that God has intuitions and those similar intuitions are similar to human intuitions as a general theistic claim against our intelligent designer, right? How can this assumption be used as an argument unless you prove this assumption? And you can't prove this assumption. So, I mean, this argument is dead. The biggest problem here is that the atheist claim regarding embryos is actually a massive lie. First, I'll give evidence for similarity not equaling common descent. Not only similarity does not equal common descent, but there is an absolutely massive amount of cases in living things where similarity is present without common descent. I'll give two references for this. One is Simon Conway Morris's book Life Solutions, and another is George McGee's book Convergent Evolution. The examples of basically similarities that are not due to common descent is absolutely massive. Simon Conway Morris goes as far as to say that convergence is ubiquitous, meaning it's everywhere, it's massive. So, if that's the case, right, the atheist claim assumes similarity equals common descent. Just because they're similar, they must have a common ancestor. But we know of an absolutely massive amount of examples in biological life where similarity is not due to common descent. Then, what is this assumption based on other than blind faith? It's clearly false, even according to the atheists. So, let's move on. Secondly, by the logic of Darwin's and Coin's argument, right? The earlier stages of the embryos should be the most similar, but vertebrate embryos start looking out very different from each other, extremely different. Then they convert somewhat in appearance in the middle before through development before diverging again. Embryos are simply not like the way Coin is claiming and Darwin claimed, and Haeckel, whose drawings they were using, has been proven as a liar. Even atheist evolutionary biologists will recognize that this clown is a liar. So further on, just to get to the point about the refutation of this, basically how embryos look, right? It is widely recognized that embryos are different at the start, at the end, but are similar somewhat in the middle of the cycle. This is a reference from the book by The Shape of Life, Genes, Development and the Evolution of Animal Form, page 195 by Rudolf Ralph. This is a major evolutionary biologist. Like he's an evolutionary biologist in a main big university, and he believes in Darwinian evolution, so you can't name bias here. A more complete view of vertebrate development. Early stages of the development of salamander, chick, and human are as varied as the post phylotopic stages, but the phylotopic stages are similar. What he's saying here is the earlier stages are very varied, the later stages are very varied. There is a middle point where they are somewhat similar. So, this is diametrically opposite to the claim Coin and Darwin were making that embryos are similar at the earliest, then they began to diverge, which is what they need for their argument to work according to them. I'll give two more references regarding basically Coin and Haeckel being liars in this regard. Counter to the expectation of early embryonic conservation, many studies have shown that there is often remarkable divergence between related species, both early and late in development. This was published in the Nature magazine. The reference is here. Despite repeated assertions of uniformity of early embryos within members of a phylum, development before the phylotypic stage is the middle part is very varied. This was published in Trends in Ecology and Evolution. So, even if the embryos were like the way Coin is claiming, right? Darwin, this argument would still be based on nothing but subjective value judgments and faulty assumptions. But the embryos are not even like that. I mean, what is the atheist claim based on here other than blind faith? Now, this part I am quoting from the book Zombie Science by Jonathan Wells, who's an intelligent design advocate, but he quotes Coin, and the references for what Coin is saying are there in the book. So, that's the reason I am quoting it. When Jerry Coyne reviewed Icons of Evolution in 2001, he criticized the book for failing to recognize that embryos of different vertebrates tend to resemble one another in early stages but diverge as development proceeds, with more closely related species diverging less widely, thus providing copious evidence for evolution. Yet Coyne knew that vertebrate embryos are not similar in their earliest stages. Not only do other evolutionary biologists acknowledge this point, but this liar Coyne knows this point as well. Indeed, in the same review that he made of the book Icons of Evolution, he acknowledged that the earliest vertebrate embryos are often less similar to one another than they are at the subsequent stages. I mean, again, Coin is, according to his own words, Coin is a liar. Like, this isn't funny. This is just pathetic. And but later, like the moral, like piece of shit that he is, Coin went on. to basically repeat its lies. Each vertebrate undergoes development in a series of stages, and the sequence of those stages happens to follow the evolutionary sequence of its ancestors. Thus, all vertebrates began development looking like embryonic fish because we all descended from a fish like ancestor. I mean, the level of dishonesty here is actually quite impressive, right? Uh, in conclusion, inshallah, I hope you have enjoyed this video. Like, this is supposed to be one of the biggest evidences for evolution, but the amount of dishonesty and lying from these clowns is actually extremely impressive. And to be honest, aren't atheists ashamed of using arguments such as this? I mean, this is so extremely dishonest. Oof. Inshallah, I hope you have enjoyed this video. Inshallah, I'll keep refuting these clowns till next time. Assalamu alaikum.